There's a musical that was on Broadway in 2022 and is now touring all around the country. And I recently saw it in Pittsburgh. It's called Shucked. And it's a comedic musical that is set in a fictional place called Cobb County, and it centers around corn. In the opening song, there's an interesting infectious disease reference that I sort of wanted to explore a little bit. And I'm going to play a little bit of the song just so you can hear that part.
Roar.
Cut to the 1400s.
Christopher Columbus brought syphilis and smallpox to the shore.
Christopher Columbus brought syphilis and smallpox to the shore. So what is the song referring to? It's referring to something called the Columbian Exchange. And that is when Christopher Columbus discovered the New World. It was kind of the first step in globalization. And the Columbian Exchange refers to the transit of goods between the Old World and the New World. And along with that commerce was an exchange of diseases. Now, in the song, they talk about Christopher Columbus bringing syphilis to the shore. That's not actually true. That was the one infectious disease that went from the New World to the Old World. At least that's what the leading hypothesis states. And there's a lot of evidence for that to be true. The biggest, in my mind, piece of evidence is you don't really hear about syphilis prior to 1492, prior to the Columbian expeditions. And soon after Christopher Columbus's sailors get back, you have the first major European outbreak in the 1494-1495 range, coinciding with the Italian wars. And the way this spreads, it has the kind of the appearance that the population has no immunity. We call that kind of a virgin soil epidemic, or a naive population, no pun intended with the virgin soil, because we're talking about a sexually transmitted infection. So this temporal link between 1492 and the subsequent outbreaks of syphilis in Europe leads you to think that this went from the New World to the Old. The other part of the song references, or the other line, references smallpox. That one clearly came from the Old World to the New World. Smallpox was endemic in Europe. People could have been incubating smallpox. It was a routine childhood disease. It was a horrific disease, maybe 25% mortality. But the native peoples that were in the New World, it wasn't known to them. It wasn't something that was endemic there. And smallpox did spread like wildfire once cases occurred, decimating populations. So much so that there's a lot of stories about how, and you can imagine in the 1400s and the 1500s, 1600s, prior to the germ theory of disease, prior to any understanding of immunity, that if one population seems impervious to infection and another seems to be highly susceptible, that could lead you to draw certain conclusions and maybe feel like one group is destined to win, one group is destined to not win. All of that kind of comes out of this idea of the differential susceptibility of populations to certain infectious diseases based on the fact that they had different immunological histories. What the larger point is that globalization, as exemplified by the start of globalization with Christopher Columbus, creates biological connectivity. And pathogens are going to exploit those new networks. And we see that in 1492, and we see it in 2026. Back then, pathogens traveled at the speed of a sailboat, then a steamship, now at the speed of a jet. And hopefully, when we get supersonic travel back at supersonic jet speeds. That doesn't mean that globalization necessarily or inherently is going to be unmanageable from an infectious disease standpoint. It means we have to be resilient, because one thing can get from one part of the globe to the other part of the globe in 24 hours. And I think that this is something that really is an important concept, that it is a small world and we live in a global world, and infectious diseases can travel. And we've had a global world since the 1400s. And once global travel begins, microbes are going to travel with us. We travel with our suitcases and we travel with our germs. And that's what that line refers to, even though they got it a little bit wrong. They lost the nuance. Columbus and the sailors, smallpox coming from old to new, but the opposite is true for syphilis, from new to old, from the Americas to Europe. But it's a fun, interesting musical with that interesting line, which most people look at as a throwaway line, but there's a lot behind that line.